Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. So as I mentioned, the briefing is being recorded. And so at the request of people who could not make it today, or for people who could not, all of them in the agency could not make it today. And so as I mentioned, we'll be sending that out, the link out to the recording, as well as all the resources we shared after the briefing. As I mentioned before, and as you know from the title, we're here today, pardon me, to talk about the importance of mindset for culture change in policing and what it means for the idea of police as peace officers. And so this isn't a new concept, but newly introduced, it's meaningful. In the context of organizations, hold on, I'm just admitting people. In the context of organizations like police agencies, we can think of mindset as the underlying attitudes and beliefs and perspectives held by the people, the workforce. It's the collective thinking that shapes how the workforce perceives and responds to things like culture change and change initiatives, which is, of course, much of what Police2Peace's work is about. Mindset influences how employees approach their work and interpret information and make decisions. For all these reasons, the mindset of organizations is important. And in policing, you could imagine it's crucial. In any agency, a mental model of where the organization is going is needed from the top down. And once that exists, then operationalizing it, where the agency is going, needs to be undertaken. It's hard work, as all of you know, to make things real, given established agency culture and not having an unlimited amount of time as a police leader to bring about change. So that's what we'll cover this morning, how you as police leaders can harness the mindset of your organizations to foster things like receptiveness and engagement and adaptability and a culture that supports and embraces police as peace officers. Many of you may know others on the screen today. We have some police leaders here who will speak about organizational mindset, policing as peace officers, and why it's important. We have Chief Jim Bierman and Chief Gerald Monahan. They've spoken before in many of our other briefings. As you may know, Jim is the former chief of Redlands, California, and the past president of National Police Foundation, now called the National Policing Institute. And Gerald is the former chief deputy of the Pinal County Sheriff's Office, the chief of police for the cities of Apache Junction and Prescott, and served as the chief of police for Yavapai Community College District, where he is now the director of Justice Studies program. So Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you to begin the briefing talking about mindset.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everybody. So as Lisa said, you know, this idea of mindset is applicable literally in every aspect of our lives, but is really the mental models by which we use to frame our world and consequently how we behave. Organizationally, the mindset of the leader and leaders, whether that be the sheriff or the chief, or at the line level, the glue that holds the police department together, I think, or the sergeants. So the mindset of the sergeants ultimately dictates the culture of the organization in many regards, and also the behavior of the people that work within the organization. I don't think we're going to talk for just a second about, that's if I can get my screen, there we go. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're even having this discussion. But I think fundamentally, when we think about mental models, the mindset, paradigms, whatever term you'd like to use, the lens through which we see the world, we'll talk about that in a bit. I think we're never getting to substantive change in policing until we change our mindset about policing, what it should be, the purpose of policing. You'll hear us use throughout this discussion interchangeable terms, but they all relate to the same theme about how we think about policing. What's the purpose of policing? What's the culture of the organization? How do we behave? What does the community want from us? And all of those kinds of things. So, you know, why are we even having this discussion today? I think these images are not new to anybody. They, you know, pull at your heartstrings if you care about policing and the people in it and communities that the cops serve and the whole process, the art and science, if you will, of policing. Then these images have to break your heart on some level, I think. Clearly, whether you're looking at the polling numbers or social media or the media or talking to your neighbors, there's a lot of people that probably are okay with the way policing is, but I think there are growing numbers of people who want to support the police. I mean, who doesn't want to be safe and secure in their neighborhoods and all that. But they are very unhappy with the way, quote in quotes, policing is being done in this country, even if they think their own sheriff's department or police department are good and doing the right thing and providing the level of and quality of service that they want. It's these other police departments, these other cops that are problematic. It's ironic, I think, in many ways, because until just recently, crime had been going down. Policing, I think, without question, is qualitatively better. It's certainly a lot better than it was when I started in the 70s. But you would not know that from looking at the polling numbers, which have historically been pretty flat. The level of trust and confidence in the police in this country has been relatively flat, even when the police have been doing a better job. But in the last several years, that level has actually gone down. So we're seeing a decreased level of trust and confidence in the police. And I don't think it's necessarily because people, don't want to be safe. They want respectful policing. You'll hear us use the term rightful policing. It's a term that I have been an acquaintance of mine, Tracy Mears, who's a law professor at Yale, is the first person I ever heard talk about this. But I just think it makes so much sense that it is why good cops get into the business. It's what most of us want from policing. And for many people, as a result of these technological phenomena known as the internet, smartphones, social media, information, images, beliefs, mental models of how things are working in the world relative to policing literally are changing at the speed of light. And things happen in one part of the country that impact communities and policing in another part of the country. Space and time is almost meaningless now as it relates to that. So I think ultimately, if you go back to that slide, we have to have a new mental model about policing for new results, and one that doesn't demonize the police, one that works for the communities that the cops are paid to protect, and the cops themselves. It has to work for everybody. It's got to work for elected officials, communities, and the cops. So that's what this is kind of all about, and I think why we're here. So as I mentioned, we've been talking about, what is the purpose of policing? I think if any good has come out of many of these really bad images of policing in this discussion about defunding the police or abolishing the police, we're not going to abolish the police. I hate to tell people that that's just not going to happen in my view. And defunding has not gone over well, and part of it may be the selection of that term, because what we should be doing is reimagining policing or rethinking it, or asking ourselves in our counties or our cities, our communities, what do we mean by policing? What do we want from the police? What's the true purpose of policing in our community? I happen to live in Redlands, California, a great city about 60 miles east of Los Angeles. And I think this is a fundamental question that we've been asking ourselves for many years. It's an ongoing question, started fundamentally when we had a leadership transition, and it's kind of an ongoing thing, and it's still today a discussion point, because I think the elected officials have not been present and accounted for in that discussion in my community. And I think the community has grappled with ways to try to find concepts that they can embrace, and what's the role we have in trying to figure that about. When we talk about the purpose of policing, I think there's very distinct commonalities, even though there are differences. Policing in one part of the country is very different than policing in another part of the country. In my county, there's, I think, 14 individual police agencies, and it's different from city to city, and the county is different. The sheriff's department is different than the city cops, and each city is different. So, but even though we have these differences, there are commonalities in all of that. And when we're looking for that true purpose of policing, I think I mentioned this a minute ago, that it's got to be realistic and sustainable. And, I don't think you should demonize the good cops who are willing to make that ultimate sacrifice for perfect strangers. I think that's a bad model. At the same time, we should hold bad policing accountable. We should try to get rid of it, and we should find this model that works for both communities and the cops and everybody else. we've had lots of discussions, I think, in this country, not enough, in my view, of this idea of, what are cops? What are they? And my own view is that they're not warriors, they're guardians who have the capacity to act in a warrior-like fashion. You'll see throughout our presentation and our discussions the three kind of central values to so much of what we think is important when we think about policing. And these three values are: we believe policing should be effective, empathetic, and just. I think within the kind of the technical aspects of policing, mission statements that are a page long or 2 pages long, or vision statements, are very problematic. And the way you can determine if they're problematic or not for your agency is just grab some young cop walking through the station and ask her or him, hey, what's our mission? And see if they can recite it to you. And the science around human recollection and memory and all that's pretty clear that you just can't have long things. So 3 to 5 points is about what we can remember. That's why zip codes have 5 digits in them, probably. So I just think you have to be effective, right? That's what you get paid to do. You got to solve crimes. Empathy is frequently missing. How often do we cut people slack, and do we understand why they've done what they've done? I'm not saying you let robbers and murderers go because they had a tough upbringing. I'm talking about more fundamental things. When you stop, for instance, somebody that's driving a car with expired tags, and they are the sole breadwinner of the house, and they're living paycheck to paycheck. And in some states like California, depending on how long the registration is expired on the car, you can impound the car. If you impound the car from a family that's living paycheck to paycheck for 30 days, like you do in California, you are essentially taking that car away from that family permanently, because they're not going to pay the impound fees or the lien fees, which immediately get up around $1,000 within like a week or so. It's just not going to happen. So you've now taken the car, which may be the only way they can get to work, which means they lose their job, which means the family, it's like a domino effect. So what does all of that mean? And you can see these discussion points here that we really think are part and parcel to creating this mindset about being a peace officer. We now know that the overwhelming majority of states in this country refer to cops as peace officers by statute. So what does that mean? How do you operationalize all of that? Gerald, I'm going to pitch it to you and have you discuss what this all means.
Great, thanks, Jim. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, good. So what is the Peace Officer Project? There's 3 images on the slide here. One talks about a rediscovering of the positive beginnings of policing. And on the website for the nonprofit Police2Peace, we go into, in the training, the historical aspects of how the police formed in America. But for the Peace Officer Project, let's look back to the 70s, where the beginnings of the community policing model. When the community policing model first came out, it was designed around the idea of building partnerships with the community, building communication streams with the community, and problem solving. And my career started in 1978. So I've watched this movement throughout my career here in Arizona, and I realize it may be different in some parts of the country and everything, but what I saw was a moving away from those 3 aspects of community policing into more of a kind of a heavy-handed enforcement and a zero tolerance initiatives that were implemented in the name of community policing, but it became heavy-handed. It became a law enforcement mindset versus the role of being a peace officer and a community servant. And what was unfortunate about that in heavy-handed law enforcement is everybody in the community got caught up in zero tolerance initiatives. And it took away the discretion from our officers in being true problem solvers, in my view. So what the Peace Officer Project does for me is it allows us to think about a reimagining, a return to the true purpose of what community policing was designed to be in the first place. Peace officers were to be problem solvers with the community, in communication with the community, and seeing themselves as a true partner. As Sir Robert Peel from the 1800s in the United Kingdom said, the police are the community and the community is the police. And the Peace Officer Project allows us to return to that. And when we think about, like right here in Arizona, where I'm from, we are certified as peace officers. And so, how did we leave that mindset and become a mindset of law enforcement? And that's what we're looking forward to returning to and reimagining that. So it's a repositioning of cops from law enforcement officers to peace officers. You think about many departments, they relegate community policing to a special unit. And that's okay to have officers that are specially trained in the concepts of partnerships, communication, and problem solving. But the mindset of being a peace officer should be the culture of the agency, so that everybody has that mindset, not just those in a special unit. Next slide, please. Jim, next slide, please. So the peace officer framework is a set of principles. It's a paradigm shift from how policing is viewed today by cops and the people they protect. And as Jim mentioned, we see policing as now falling under these three words: policing that's effective, policing that's empathetic, and policing that's just. And this is what we believe the community really wants. And the part of being empathetic, think about policing as a human business. We are in the business of humanity. People's lives are impacted by a number of different factors. And as police officers, as peace officers, we have the ability of knowing all of the various resources that exist in our community. Some may not have anything to do with crime or criminal behavior, but they do have an impact on humans and how humans survive in our community. So the human services aspect of what we do as peace officers is huge in helping people navigate their lives and deal with the various conflicts and situations that they find themselves in. Next slide, please. It's about changing the lenses through which we as cops see our relationship with the people we're paid to protect in the community. If we view ourselves as law enforcement, then in my mind, there may be an approach to be suspicious of all the behaviors we encounter throughout our shifts. But if we look at our job as problem solvers, as bringing peace to chaos, as bringing peace to conflict, it's a different lens where we begin to see the needs of the individuals that we're in service to as those that we can help connect to resources that solve those problems. And in doing so, we actually can interrupt the process of violence and possibly interrupt the process of criminal behavior. Next slide, please. How is this problem addressed, and what does the Peace Officer Project do to address the problem? We understand that they're following a series of events that go back to Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, but highlighted after the murder of George Floyd. There became a crisis of trust and confidence in policing. And it was unfortunate, as Jim mentioned, the aspects of social media and how police were demonized all over the country for the actions of very few. And in the case of George Floyd, one in particular, at any given day in our nation, there are hundreds of thousands of working police officers and law enforcement officials in various agencies of federal, state, county, campus. Yet the entire profession was suffering from what happened there in Minneapolis, and it became a crisis of trust and confidence in policing. The significant negative narrative that came out of how it was pushed through social media was unfortunate because it painted the entire profession in that negative light. And then the movement to defund and abolish the police actually gained a lot of steam in some communities and is still present today. And part of it, we as the police in our profession, we have to take ownership of what occurred there. And the lack of a national coherence around policing plays a part in this, where individual departments and the culture within individual departments and individual sheriff's office around the country clearly reflect a different approach and a different style to policing. So what problem is addressed by the Peace Officer Project? It allows a mindset to come into the focus where we have different policies or different standards or different approaches. If it's under the umbrella of a peace officer mindset, then we begin to approach things with a different lens on how we serve our communities. Next slide, please. So why should we do this? Smartphones, social media, the internet compel policing to be concerned about this. These optics are not going away anytime soon, if at all. Social media and the fact that everybody in our society now has a camera and an instant ability to record events and post them as they're recording is not going to go away. This is unfortunate because it allows the context of what is occurring to be displayed in a way that may not reflect what actually has occurred. The narrative, we need to change the narrative about policing. What happened in Memphis, Tennessee recently in that situation, there was policies against that. There were laws against what those officers did, but it was the culture within that unit, within that department that caused what happened there. So we have to be present to do much more good than harm, understanding that we may not get the positive press for that, but the community will recognize it. Change before somebody else makes you change. What we saw after George Floyd was a significant movement that impacted policing budgets, policing hiring, policing retention, and even the mental health of the police officers and deputies who served the community. They were impacted. And so by embracing a peace officer mindset, which over 40 different states certify their officers and deputies as peace officers, we bring about real change to the profession. And where this challenge exists, we've also have an opportunity for improvement. We're not going to defund the police. We're not going to abolish the profession, but we have to take ownership that there is an opportunity for change and revisiting how we approach our job in such a way, and the mindset that we approach our job with. Next slide, please.
I think this is next slide comes to me. Before I do that, if we could add a fifth point probably to this slide, I would make it very simply. It's just the right thing to do, right? It's when we all think about what we want from policing, I think we just want it to be done right. We want rightful policing that's constitutionally correct, that's respectful and trustworthy, and we can have credibility. And I don't find this to be super complicated. Conceptually, it is much more complicated when we start getting into, how do you actually go.
So one of the goals of the Peace Officer Project is to present information, change, training, a mindset, a philosophy that's sustainable. The mindset of how do we justify our actions, our beliefs, our worldview, our perspectives, the culture behind what we're doing that connects us to the community, and the associations and connections and interactions that create bonds between two or more people, or between the profession, the police officers and deputies that serve that community, and how they are now creating that relationship. And then the institutions involved. What does society expect from our police departments and from our sheriff's office in the way of service? Certainly, law enforcement and enforcing the laws of our communities are important, but understanding the human dynamic and the expectation of the community that it'll be done in a way that is effective, empathetic, and just. And with that, Jim, I'll turn.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. So I gave you a tease here with this little thing. This idea of a big, hairy, audacious goal has been around for a long time in organizational behavior research and discussions in the kind of the management leadership literature. But it really, when we're talking about repositioning or moving an organization from one that's primarily focused on enforcing the laws versus keeping the peace, right? Law enforcement officers versus peace officers, where law enforcement is a subset of keeping the peace. We're really talking about cultural change. Anybody who's been involved with any organization, but certainly policing for any length of time, understands this saying that culture eats policy for lunch every day. It is the culture that drives behavior. As Gerald pointed out, no doubt at all that the agency had, I think it was Memphis, had multiple policies that says you're not supposed to beat people to death. You're not supposed to hold somebody up while another officer beats them. State law says you can't do that. Policy says you can't do it. But obviously their culture allowed that to happen. And so that's a perfect example of why this can be so problematic and why really police leaders today are, we may call them sheriffs or police chiefs, what we really should be calling them are culture managers, right? Cultural change managers, because the culture, like life, is, well, culture is a reflection of our environment and a bunch of other things, but it changes and it is subject to change, just like life is, because nothing is static in life. Nothing's static in policing, even though we would like it to be. While we are having this discussion today, something's changing in policing, and it may be substantive or not, but it's never the same. And we need to be, I think, in policing, we need to adapt a better perspective around this idea of having a tolerance for ambiguity and change and risk that relates to not the run and shoot part of policing, not the law enforcement, the apprehension part, but the people part. As Gerald said earlier, policing is a people business. I happen to believe that in policing, only people count. Everything else is secondary, but the primary thing about policing is people, internally, externally, and all of that. So when we're talking about moving an organization from one place, law enforcement, to another, peace officer, that peace officer framework or mindset, we're really talking about cultural change. And most of the reforms that we have talked about in this country or we hear about, they're important. I don't want to minimize the things that increase the quality of policing, the effectiveness, or the other attributes of it. I think we are advancing policing through all these reform efforts, but most of them do not focus on the culture of the organization. That's not really what they're intended to do. So in the world of cultural change, there's this idea of nudging the organization as opposed to forcing it. And I think that this is really appropriate in policing. Cops don't like to be told what to do. They don't like to be ordered around. It's just not something that they are okay with, except maybe in an emergency situation, right? But generally speaking, they don't operate. And most of the calls they deal with are not in progress. Most of the stuff they deal with is not of an emergent nature. I think, especially as we're talking about intergenerational issues within policing, when we're seeing a new generation of cops coming in, they want to be nudged. They're more amenable to being nudged into a certain direction as opposed to being forced to do it. I don't know if it was Lisa or Gerald earlier talked about the churn rate among police leaders, and it's prodigious. Most police chiefs in this country don't last very long. Right? They're in that position at the end of their careers. So they get ready to retire or they get fired. They're almost all at will employees once they get to that point. And so they're not there very long. And so I was the police chief, for instance, in my community for 13 years. The city next to me, during the time I was the one police chief in Redlands, they had 6 police chiefs in the same period of time. So, and some of my former officers went to work for that city. And in talking to them, they said, well, this is very simple over here. If you don't like what the chief is doing, just stand by and wait him out, because they don't last very long here. So we just wait them out and, we go about our business. So how do we do that? How do we nudge the culture of policing? I mean, there's a lot involved in that, and we're not going to cover it all right here. But I think a lot of it has to do with talking internally and externally about what we mean by policing. My own belief is that policing doesn't exist in the volume, that you really have to have 3 kind of major themes going on with it. You've got the community, the elected officials that have some control depending on the policing model, and internally the workforce itself. It's kind of like 3 legs on a tripod. And if you're not dealing with all 3 of those as you move the culture, then you're probably going to have some problems. As I have mentioned previously, the majority of states, by statute, cops are referred to as peace officers. It's almost 80% of them refer in one way or another. Almost 3/4 of them refer to cops exclusively as peace officers. That's the case in California. You don't, in the penal code where the cops' authority and responsibilities are outlined, you see no place in there do you see police officer or cops or whatever. It's all peace officer, and that's what it is. So as Gerald earlier said, how do we get away from that idea, that notion? Why is that the term, and why have we seemed to have lost sight of that? I think good cops, the reason people get into policing is around the ideas that we're talking about here already. So it's not a radical departure for why they got into policing. Clearly, some of them got into it because you get to carry a badge and a gun and put people in jail. And those are the people who shouldn't have gotten policing in the first place. I don't believe that most cops think that's their primary purpose. Clearly some do. And I believe in the nobility of good policing, good policing. I hate bad policing. There's a saying that nobody hates bad policing better than or more than good cops, right? Good cops hate bad policing more than anybody else because it taints everybody. They understand that that is a choice those cops made in abusing people. Nobody made them do that, et cetera, et cetera. And as we're nudging people and talking about this peace officer framework, I think it's important to remind everybody, especially the workforce, that this model doesn't constrain the cops from enforcing the law. I mean, it's a subset. I think enforcing the law is a subset of being a peace officer, but it is not the primary focus. If you look at what cops do, if you do a data analysis of what they do in most communities, they do not spend most of their day today enforcing the law anyway. Most of the time it's about conflict resolution or preventing crime or community engagement or other administrative tasks that they're doing. Gerald, to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So what do we mean by peace officer? As we've said several times now, policing that is effective, empathetic, and just. And we've had some comments made about, the actual work that police officers and deputies are doing out there. And the reality is they have to have the ability of using discretion in the application of their duties. Some of the issues that our officers are faced with, they're out there alone. Sometimes the deputies in particular may be out there alone working to resolve issues that are complex, issues that didn't start overnight, but that have been building over time. So we don't want to take away the discretion from our officers and our deputies to act, but we want to make sure that in that discretion, they have a mindset that their primary goal is to bring peace to chaos. If they uncover a criminal act, then this is not soft on crime. They'll enforce the law as appropriate to bring about the solution that needs to be in that particular situation. But the discretion that our officers and our deputies have to have, as long as they're operating from a mindset of being a peace officer and bringing peace to chaos, then that discretion is good. What we know, with the police chief or the sheriff that may set the culture tones from the top of the organization as the leader, but it's that frontline supervisor, it's the field training officer that is going to have the biggest impact on a new recruit coming in who may have got into the profession, as Jim mentioned, for all the right reasons, to serve, to be effective, to do the right thing for the community. So mindset and cultural change from the top all the way through the organization is significant in bringing about true policing. Next slide, please, Jim. Peace officer is smart on crime. This is not to absolve our responsibilities to enforce the law. The Peace Officer Project is smart on crime. We will enforce the law, but as we do that enforcement, does it align with the values of the community? Does it align with the idea that human beings and people run into situations where maybe there is an alternative for some situations as opposed to an arrest and putting them into the criminal justice system? What other resources exist in the community to strengthen families as opposed to just heavy-handed enforcement? Community peacekeeping. What role can we play in our position as peace officers in being a part of interrupting the process of violence through various community activities and community partnerships? And it focuses on the commonalities. There are more commonalities that connect us as a society than there are that divide us. And in the division, that dividing rhetoric and dividing approach to policing actually separates us from our partnership with the community. We should always be looking for proactive ways to connect with the community. And by doing so, it allows us to open those channels of communication, which are so important for policing to even accomplish their mission. When communities no longer trust the police, then they're not going to call and report crime. They're not going to call and report information that could help us solve community problems and restore community peace. Next slide, please. So again, being a peace officer is not soft on crime. It's not inconsistent with policing's legal mandate. It's not a radical departure from policing's fundamental purpose. Alienating to the people cops are paid to protect. It's not about that. It's about connecting the police and sheriff's deputies to the people they're paid to protect. It's not a weakening of policing's authority. In Arizona, we are governed by Arizona peace officer standards and training. So our mandate from day one, and I've been in the business for 42 years, has been that of being recognized as a peace officer. And this is not costly or difficult to implement. And one of the things the nonprofit Police2Peace have available to all is online trainings, a toolkit of how to bring about the cultural change that many of us want to see throughout our nation. All of the tools necessary to create this cultural change and to nudge this change throughout our agencies is available to you on the Police2Peace website. Next slide, please. And again, how is this different from being a law enforcement officer? It is a different mindset. Peace officers do have law enforcement responsibilities, but as Jim mentioned, many times the majority activities that an officer is engaged in that day may have nothing to do with actually enforcing the law. It may be more with conflict resolution. and connecting with the community in ways that bring about the various resources that may have nothing to do with law enforcement, but that have everything to do with helping people navigate the difficulties in their life. It's much more comprehensive approach than just law enforcement. It's focused on facilitation of peace within the community. What do we want in our communities? We want a safe community. We want a community where the mindset throughout the community, by all our elected leaders, by our community leaders, by workers in every field, enjoying the peace of the community. It's what we want policing to be. Jim, and I'll hand that back to you.
Okay, thanks, Gerald. So before we leave this slide, I'd just like to point out a couple of things. This slide, this badge is a photo of the actual badge today of the Vail, Colorado Police Department. And you'll see right there, it says Peace Officer. And so the chief at Vail is the immediate past president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and IACP is very interested in community policing. And so if I was Dwight and the chief of that department and I wanted to do this, this would be so easy to nudge the cops into this discussion, because I'd say, just look at your badge. What's that say right there? What does that mean? How do we operationalize this? And that's one of the big, I think, challenges in any cultural change or talking about something here. The devil's in the details. You know, we used a term earlier about repositioning, and part of the marketing aspect of this is the idea, and you may have seen some of these photos, I don't know if we have them here, but putting decals on the cars that say, the patrol cars that say Peace Officer, but also, as the Richland County, South Carolina Sheriff's Department has done, on all the back of all of the deputies' jackets and load-bearing vests, and maybe their uniforms too. Or maybe it's just a rocker. It says Peace Officer right on there. And in sheriff, I think, I can't quite remember what it says, but the sheriff there gets the idea and the importance of symbolism. Why do cops have badges? You know, you don't need a piece of tin on your chest to do that job, right? Why do they wear uniforms? All of these are symbolic as a way of demonstrating authority and responsibility, I think, to be the guardians of the county, the guardians of the community, however you want to phrase that. But it's symbolic of the oath and the commitment that that person has taken in relative to protecting the people of that community. And I think in the implementing of all of this and the nudging of the organization to that place, you have to have these kinds of discussions, right? This model and the products and services that Police2Peace offers at an amazingly inexpensive price, in my opinion, having purchased lots of police training over the years, is designed to give police leaders the tools, but it's not designed to do the work for them. Leadership is hard work. It's about doing things. It's about helping people understand that they can achieve more than they thought they could, taking them to a place they didn't know they could go, and achieving great things in the community. And in policing, it's about so much of that and more. It's just such a complicated job in so many ways. And I think that as we're talking about this and we're trying to explain to people and sell it to people, whatever term you want to use, you have to, I think, be mindful of the notion of what the literature calls WIFM, but it's what's in it for me. And WIFM, what's in it for me, sounds like a very narcissistic kind of an approach to things. And that's not really what it means, because sometimes what's in it for me is giving me the opportunity to serve my community, right? It could be very altruistic in many ways. Sometimes it's about the wellness of officers. I think there's research, certainly in the private sector, about work environments and the emotional well-being of employees. When you work in a toxic environment, your stress level goes up, your psychological, mental health, it goes down, your physical health can go down. And, we're in the process of trying to locate more on point research about this. And it's amazing to me that there isn't more about it, since given the amount of discussion we're having about officer safety and wellness. It's the wellness piece that's really kind of front and center these days. Is that my belief is that when you work as a cop in a community where people wave at you with all fingers on their hand, or where they smile at you when you drive by or show up, and they're willing to talk to you about things, they're willing to ask for your help, and they're willing to help you, you have a better mental health environment in which you work. And so when you think about it, if I was talking to a bunch of cops about this, or the union, if you have a union in your state and organization, I'd be talking about what's in it for you guys. Certainly from a union standpoint, it's like, do you think people are going to support an increase in your salary and benefit package if you guys are a bunch of jerks and you mistreat people? Or do you think they're much more likely to be okay with the elected officials granting you increases in salary and benefits because they think you're doing the right thing, that you're the guardians of the community, that you're engaged in rightful policing, that we trust you, we have confidence in you, and we don't think you abuse us, that we think that you are empathetic in your approach to stopping us or talking to us or whatever, and you follow the Constitution, you engage in constitutional policing activities, right, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I'd say to the union, and what I'd say to the cops specifically is all this stuff. Obviously, policing is dangerous. I used to be on the board of the National Law Enforcement Officer Memorial Fund, and if anybody doubts that policing is dangerous, I would encourage them to go see the National Law Enforcement Memorial in downtown DC, where there are about 20,000 names of cops who've been killed in the line of duty. But I think the real danger in policing is not so much that you could get killed. I mean, that's clearly a possibility. You're going to get hurt. I mean, that's obvious. But I think the real danger is what it does to your spirit, right? It's the cynicism that builds up. It's the mental stress, the mental health, what it does and how it can damage your personal relationships with your spouse, your kids, your family, and friends, et cetera, especially those who are not in the business of policing. And so by working in an organization that applies peace officer concepts internally and externally, I think you can draw a direct line from this mindset of being a peace officer organization and operationalize it and aligning all aspects of the organization, from recruitment to reward systems to accountability measures. All those things have to be aligned with these ideas of being effective, empathetic, and just as peace officers. That you're going to be healthier and you'll be happier and you'll think better about your career when you get to the end of it and you look back. I'm retired now, so I spend a lot of time reflecting on my career. And fortunately, I worked in a place that did a bunch of this stuff without even knowing we were doing it. And we've been evolving our own model of this probably for many years. And so I have great thoughts and recollections of policing. I have friends who worked in other places that were pretty toxic, and they worked their whole career there. And they don't have the same kind of memories about the work they spent so much of their life in. And I think that's sad. And so that's what I think is in it for cops. But you also have to think, I think, about, why do the police exist? Fundamentally, they're not there to serve themselves. They're there to serve people, right? They're there to protect the community. They're there to keep everybody safe. So, and I don't think we spend enough time thinking about this from a community perspective. I'm a big fan of community-led policing. Listen to your customer base. If we had competition in policing, in other words, if you could, when you called 911, you had a voicemail thing, press 1 for the sheriff's department, press 2 for the local police, press 3 for the state police, we might think differently about policing. If our outcomes were tied to our compensation, we might think differently about that. And if we had a private sector model that has a profit motive, there's a financial incentive for that company to be responsive to its customers, to produce products that people want to buy and will continue to want to buy. In the public sector, we get paid whether people like us or not. That's not the way it works, and that is problematic. And there's been some interesting experiments over the years about trying to inject some competition into this to try to get a more responsive portfolio of government services. So I think if I was talking to community people, I said, do you want the cops to be effective? My own experience has been that the people who care most about not having their stuff stolen are people who struggled to buy it in the first place, people at the lower end of the socioeconomic strata, right? Rich people can go out and buy more stuff. People that don't have a lot of money can't. So when your kid's bike gets stolen, that's a big deal for you, right? So are the cops effective? And we've already talked about empathetic, and the just part of this is really, the kind of more technical buzz term is constitutional policing. Are we following the Constitution? Are we understanding what that means? And are we okay with people filming us? Or do we look at public protests that are not violent more as parades as opposed to events that we think we need to intervene in? And this last point on this slide, I think is, I don't know, I think it's kind of a spiritual piece of things. I think one of the reasons we're having trouble recruiting in this country, recruiting cops in this country, is because there are families or maybe potential candidates themselves who just don't view policing as a noble thing for their kids to do or for them to do, right? It's just not something they want to see their kids doing. I would not be proud if my kid became a cop, kind of a thing, right? And that's because of the way policing is consumed and perceived in those communities. And that breaks my heart on some level. And we've got to change that, right? We've got to create an environment. And you'll know, I think, that we've done that when we don't have trouble with a diverse candidate pool, because the families of those candidates have said, I'll support you in this because I would be proud to see you wearing a sheriff's badge or a local PD badge, because I believe in what they're doing and I believe in that institution. And then if I had another slide on here, I'd probably say what's in it for elected officials, because I said this earlier, that there's these three pieces, and I just think that we need to hold elected officials' feet to the fire in terms of weighing in and supporting a cultural change to this model. And they get let off the hook way too often, in my opinion. So that's kind of, I think, our presentation so far. Lisa, if you want to wrap it up and talk a little bit about services and products or whatever, or how to get a hold of all of us, that'd be great. And we can answer any questions after she's done.
Thanks so much, Jim. And yes, so after this, we'll be emailing everybody with a follow-up email that has all of the resources I'll be sharing with you in just a moment. We'd like to share something with you that's pretty interesting, and that is we are in the spirit of this, where we're talking about mindset. We've developed roll call posters, briefing posters, and so I'm going to share what that is with you. And so it is an offer where we will develop for any agency roll call posters. And so there are 4 posters in all. I'll share with you what they are. We'll put this link in the chat. If you all want to put your name and agency name and email address, what we're going to be doing is we will develop, this is an example of a poster for Arizona State University. Again, I'll show you that there are 4 in all. We can send you print-ready files. We can also print them for you. And it's a great way as a reminder for the type of mindset that we've been talking about today. So that's one thing we'll be putting in the chat. Also, as many of you may know, we have a training, and the training is in the peace officer mindset. And so this training is something that we've been working on for a long time. It is the ability to convey the mindset of peace officer, so that when people are going through the training, whether you're an elected official, whether you are a community member, whether you're a cop, whether you're a leader, it's this course, which is Peace Officer Realizing the True Purpose of Policing. And then down here, you can see that we have all of these different trainings. We have certifications, we have peace officer certification, we have different trainings. It's between 5 and 8 hours, and in many states, it is certified for continuing education credits. It is IADLA certified nationally. And then as Jim mentioned, for the course, we're a nonprofit, but we do have a small fee for the course, especially when agencies come in and buy, a couple of hundred different course licenses for their community and their members, et cetera, and their elected officials. And so we have funding opportunities available as well, where the federal government through NTAC is supporting the funding of the courses themselves. So when we talk about funding, we talk about the ability for agencies to connect with this funding resource where they can, and again, we'll put all of this in the chat, where an agency can apply to BJA NTAC. We also work with the COPS office for microgrants. That program just closed. But if you click right here for the US DOJ NTAC, you can request funding. It's a pretty simple process. I actually see agencies on here today who have already done it. And so they may tell you it's a very small amount of paperwork. The agency contacts us. We go through the funding process, and then all of the agency's course licenses, including training and assistance, technical training and assistance, and other materials are reimbursed or paid directly by the federal government. So those are the types of things we wanted to share. I will share with you, just for fun, the roll call posters, because it's a new thing that we have. We had a request from agencies, and that is, we're trying to convey the mindset. How can we convey the mindset more so in our agency? Well, this poster is about 40 inches high. And one second. I had too many things on my screen. This poster is about 40 inches high. I'm not sure you can see that. For some reason, I have a sign into Adobe. Apologize. Anyway, the posters are 40 inches high. They have one for effective, one for empathetic, one for just, and then also the agency badge. And we have another one, which we developed, which is on the door where officers are leaving the agency, going out into the field. It says in various ways, and we took it actually from, it was Jim's idea, and that is college sports teams and major teams have a sign on the door when they enter the field: through this door walk champions. Well, the signs that we provide you with the poster, so you can put on your door leaving the agency out in the field: through this door walk peace officers. And we think that's a wonderful way to instill the mindset. Again, we will be sending out the chat after this. We'll be sending out the PowerPoint. We'll be sending out the recording, all of the links. If you don't think we have your email, please put it in the chat. We get emails, of course, from all of you. We know many of you, and also from LinkedIn and on our list. And it was wonderful to spend time with you today. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Be safe out there.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, sir.